Hello everybody and welcome to another list video on the channel, and the last in this second chance series. We've done Guardian, Seeker, Rogue, and Mystic, and we're here on Survivor. Survivor is a pretty weird one to find for 5 cards that you should give a second chance. And this is actually probably the one that I have the most experience with. Some of these cards I was like, I'm going to give a second chance as part of this series and test it out. But these are actually 5 Survivor cards that I have recently had, and by say recently, I mean like in 2023, that I've recently had a change of opinion on after trying them again a second time. So some of the cards on this list, you're gonna like probably turn your head at and be like, what the hell? That can't be right. But I promise you, the utility of these cards is actually higher than we probably give credit for. So this video is to maybe like next time you're looking for that last 30th card, be like, hey, you know, maybe my upgrade plan or my level 0 deck is gonna work with one of these, because I think these cards actually pop off more in the right situations. For some of them, especially when you have a better understanding of board state or board control, which I'll get into those cards. But first, let's dive into our card here, which is Improvised Weapon. So this is a 1-cost event from the Forgotten Age. It's a tactic and improvised. That tactic is important for Mr. Mark Harrigan, which we'll get to. You may play Improvised Weapon from your discard pile. If you do, shuffle it into your deck after resolving its effects. Fight. The attacked enemy gets -1 fight for this attack. If you played Improvised Weapon from your discard pile, this attack deals +1 damage. For the longest time, when I looked at these cards, I was like, these cards can only exist in a synergy package in which you are discarding cards and then taking advantage of these abilities. And I believed that for a very long time. Travis, however, has been a long proponent of these kinds of cards, both, actually all of them, Winging It, Improvised Weapon, and also Impromptu Barrier. He plays them kind of just, even when he doesn't have crazy discard synergy, or sometimes without any discard synergy at all, which I thought was pretty interesting. And honestly, the cards are pretty impressive. I first started putting Winging It into just any of my investigator decks that could play this, because I was like, I like Winging It. It's a good card. I'm happy to see it 2-3 times in a scenario. And worst case scenario, I'm also happy to just play it. And I just was doing Winging It for normal, without any sort of like high discard synergy in my deck. And then recently I started doing the same thing with Improvised Weapon. It's still just 2 damage. It's a kill spell. This is one of those things that is really nice. It also works really well when you are, for example, shooting a gun, say with Mr. Mark Harrigan, and you're dealing with 3 health enemies. It can suck to have to spend an ammo to deal that 2 damage when they already have 2 damage marked on them to get that last point of health off of them. So you could just punch them normally, or you could play an Improvised Weapon from your hand to just get it set up for the future in your graveyard and also essentially get a +1 fist for this attack. It gets better with discard synergy. I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't. The card gets much better when you're actually doing graveyard synergy as well, like discard synergy and all that kind of thing. However, I've been playing it recently in decks that don't have any of that stuff, and it works pretty well. So try it out. I think you should. I think you would eventually upgrade out of it into better kill spells. So like if I'm playing Sweeping Kick in my decks and I can run Improvised Weapon, generally Improvised Weapon is like there at level 0 to kind of fit a similar kill spell kind of hole. But if you have like any sort of discard synergy in your deck at all and you're not playing these cards, I think you should try it out. You should try it out. You need to have like probably like 3 or 4 fist or ways to like commit cards to boost it more consistently, but I think the card is really good. Curious to see if Impromptu Barrier follows a similar path, because it was first Winging It, now Improvised Weapon. I'm curious to see where this goes for me in the future. Next card on our list here is Hiding Spot. Okay, hear me out. So this is a 1-cost event. It's a tactic and a trick. Attach Hiding Spot to any location. Each non-elite enemy at attached location gains aloof. Forced. At the end of the enemy phase, if a ready enemy is at attached location, discard Hiding Spot. This card came out all the way back in Path to Carcosa. And I pulled it out of my binder most recently for the first time that I can recall with Parallel Ashcan Pete. I'm not gonna say that everyone can play this card the same way as Parallel Ashcan Pete, But I think this card is actually more playable than I originally gave it credit for. Some of this is the evolution of Dodge. So Dodge recently is a card that has been growing in my in positivity for me. Dodge is a 1-cost card in the Guardian class where you cancel an enemy's attack at your location. It's really good, actually. I think Dodge is very versatile, and anything that costs 1 resource, I think, is worthy of a slot in your deck for very little consideration, because it's just like really cheap and it's practically free. It's not free, but it's practically free. And dodges have become so kind of ubiquitous for me in terms of like how I approach and how it changes my play pattern in the game, that Deny Existence now has kind of become just a dodge to me. There was a video we recorded recently where Bryn joked when I was talking about Deny Existence, I was using it in the enemy phase, and Bryn was like, do I got a card to tell you about? And that's dodge. And it's very true. Enemy management is kind of like the next level of winning Arkham, right? So like, killing enemies is great, but sometimes you can't kill all the enemies. So then how can I take advantage of these enemies? Or alternatively, instead of killing these enemies this turn, how can I better set up for the future to win next turn when these enemies are, in a different position or a more advantageous position? And cards like Hiding Spot and the next card on our list are ways that we can do that. So, this card is basically a dodge for Survivor, right? You need to be able to, it works a little bit differently, where it works better on like hunter enemies, which is something that you just need to be aware of. However, what this card can also do is it can just also like free up a location. Say, for example, there's a location that has an enemy on it and some people need to move through it. You can just throw Hiding Spot on that location, move through that location, and then that enemy is not a problem. And if it doesn't have hunter, that enemy is unlikely to be a problem. Some odd things about this one is that it's a little bit awkward to play. Like, you have to play it during the investigator phase, you need to play it during your turn, like all those kind of things that normal fast events kind of just live. If this was played during any lightning bolt window, holy shit, this card would sing. But I think it already does hum pretty well. And it's one of those things where I don't think you need to run 2 of these. I think like we're on close. I know this is something that some other content creators say, and I generally agree with the sentiment. We are close to the tipping point where one-ofs are become much more of a thing. We're on like the age where maybe like 12 cards of your deck are 2-ofs, and then the rest could be like 1-ofs, and your deck would still function, I think, just as well as a deck full of 2-ofs. I think we are close to that tipping point, and I think with moments like that, Hiding Spot is going to go up in even more value. I like this card a lot. And I've been playing it outside of Parallel Ashcan Pete, but trust me, this is the best card in Parallel Ashcan Pete. This card is insane in him. I still think Parallel Ashcan Pete is an S-tier investigator, and I think this makes him like S+ tier. It's really good. It's very good in him. Again, it really all comes down to enemy management, and this is kind of just like some of the cheapest enemy management that you can get. Next card is also enemy management, but a little bit more expensive. This is one that actually surprised me, and I'm starting to bring it into a lot of decks that can run it. And that card is Lure. So Lure level 2. There is a level 1 version, but I'm looking at the level 2 version for a very important reason. This is a 1-cost 2 experience event in the Survivor class from the Circle Undone. Attached to your location or connecting location. During the enemy phase, each enemy that moves does so along the shortest path toward the attached location instead of where it would normally move. Forced, while attached at the end of the round, discard Lure. So this card is like a dodge, right? If we could just like do it like that, it's like the simplest thing. You're basically canceling, quote unquote, canceling an enemy's attack in the phase if like you have hunter enemies. And a lot of enemies have hunter in this day and age. But this card goes, if we go into deeper what the card actually does, you're controlling the enemy's movement. It's enemy management. Again, the thing that I've been talking about a lot recently, because as I said, to me personally, this is like the next level of my Arkham discoveries, right? What this card does is if you, for example, put it on a location connecting to yours that is also connected to your location, that means that all the hunter enemies are going to move to that location. Even if, it's like they have to go to the shortest path towards it. So, like, if the shortest path to that location is through your location, maybe just don't be an idiot and don't put it on that location, right? Like, that's the kind of thing, like, with lure, there is a lot of, stuff like that. Like, there can be situations where it doesn't work because of those reasons, but a lot of those times those reasons come down to just like poor management or, scenarios that it doesn't work on. That's going to happen for sure in these things. But I do think that this card is actually quietly very impressive. I played this card very recently, again in Parallel Ashcan Pete, where it goes to the moon, because you get to return it to your hand, right? However, I do think that this card is actually playable as probably a one of, in some cases a two of, in a lot of investigators' decks that can run it. And the reason for that is because, again, enemy management, I think, is a very powerful tool. Killing enemies is obviously the number one thing that you should be doing in this game. When an enemy shows up, if you can kill it that turn, go for it. However, if you can't kill it, or alternatively you need to get set up for the future, being able to use those actions instead of like killing it or like tanking the attacks because it's a hunter enemy moving to your location, being able to turn that on its head and just like open up the turn completely, and in turn also open up your next turn completely because the enemy now has to move towards you. You basically just got a free turn away from that enemy, is a very powerful effect. If you have ways to return this, like, I don't know, say like Resourceful, that could be something to do as well if you're not playing Brute Force, because Brute Force is still the number one card to return with Resourceful, in my opinion, or Lucky 3, of course. But I do think that Lure is actually, it pops off more than I expected it to, and I think the card is actually kind of crazy. And I'm excited to explore more. Like, I could like look at this in a year and be like, I was silly for thinking that Lure 2 was actually good. But Parallel Ashcan Pete, he plays these cards better than everyone else, right? But it opened up a new perspective for me in terms of how do I manage my turns in Arkham Horror, the card game. And this is kind of like the ripple effect of that discovery. And maybe not all these theses are going to be correct, but right now I actually do believe the words that are coming out of my mouth. This is not clickbait. This is not me trying to farm engagement from people in the comments, but I actually do think that just like the reason why this one's better than Lure 1 is that you can do it on a connecting location. Keep in mind also that Survivors XP works differently for Survivors. So it's one of those things where I think this card also is worth more value because of that. Because, for example, 2 XP in the Survivor class is worth a lot less than 2 XP in the Rogue class, or the Guardian class, or the Mystic class, because they have other things that are more important to spend their experience on because they have higher experience levels, because Survivor mostly caps out at 3 apart from a few exceptions. So these are all things of why I think this card is better than I previously gave it credit for. And I mean, like, even like in this, so this came out in Before the Black Throne. There's a very scary enemy in that set, in that scenario, called Mindless Dancers, and this is ways to just beat it for a bit. Very interesting card. I think you should try it out. I'm going to be trying it out more and more, and I really enjoy it. Next up on our list is, I think I've talked about this card previously as a card that surprised me, and that is Lantern. So this is a 2-cost, 0 experience asset from Paths Carcosa. Takes up a hand slot. It's an item and a tool, and as an action, you investigate. Your location gets -1 shroud for this investigation. As an action, you can also discard Lantern, deal 1 damage to an enemy or location. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. There's an upgraded version of Return to Paths Carcosa. A lot of what I'm going to say here also applies to that one. This card surprised me. I played this in Wilson Richards, because he essentially gets +2. He gets -1 shroud and then +1 extra ability, so he's kind of getting a +2, but not really. And I also played this as one of my splash cards in a recent Jim Culver deck that I brought to the table. And that was just basically like Jim Clover. Like, my job was just to get clues. But this card is kind of like a fair magnifying glass. which is good because Magnifying Glass is kind of broken. If you don't know, Magnifying Glass is a Seeker card. It's a 0 cost fast. No, it's 1 cost at level 0. It's a 1 cost fast, takes up a hand slot. You get +1 book while investigating. And Seekers will play that card happily because it is very good. It's not exciting, but it is just very efficient for its cost. Lantern, I think, is a fair version of that card. You're essentially getting +1 book while you are investigating. And that is nice for a multitude of reasons. One, lowered Shroud is better than increased skill score generally. Generally, right? It's especially true in the Survivor class because of cards like Look What I Found. This can turn a 3 Shroud location into a 2 Shroud location, meaning that if you auto-fail, you can use your Look What I Found to grab clues. Alternatively, you can also turn a 4 Shroud location into a 3 Shroud location, which suddenly means that your 5 book is that much more doable to beat the hump, to get that -2 that you want to be up in Standard. You want to be up 2 in Standard the majority of the time that you're, not majority because you can't do it all the time. I know majority is the right word. Not all the time, but most of the time you want to be at least up 2 when you are at the very least investigating in Standard difficulty. This is all just little things that make Lantern actually, again, it's very fair, but a fair Magnifying Glass is still a powerful card. The reason why Lantern has lost a lot of steam, and I think it's very fair for why this has happened, it's because of cards like Old Keyring. Old Keyring is a Nutter Butters card, and Scavenging is another reason for that. You don't, if you had to choose between scavenging out a Lantern or scavenging out an Old Keyring, I know what I would choose probably 90% of the time, and the answer to that is, of course, Old Keyring. However, I don't think that diminishes Lantern, and if you're not playing a scavenging deck, I think long-term, Lantern is going to do more for you than an Old Keyring. The Old Keyring has 2 uses at level 0, I believe. It costs 1, gives you -2 Shroud, and you only spend the key if you pass. That's pretty good. Lantern, however, is going to give you -1 forever when you play it. And it also has the deal 1 damage to enemy location, which is quietly actually a pretty powerful ability on the card. This really jumped out for me when I was playing Wilson Richards. I killed 2 bosses with a Lantern, but it can also kill things that are aloof. It can kill things that, like your fighter put 2 damage on, and you can be like, hey, I'll just finish this thing off. And there's recursion in Survivor that makes it really doable. This was comboed with Gravedigger Shovel, but don't get it twisted. Gravedigger Shovel is pretty bad. The clue version of action on Gravedigger Shovel is pretty alright, but the damage is just not the same. It's not the same of just... Generally, an investigate action is better than a fight action, especially when that is just for a 1-to-1, 1 damage versus 1 clue, because a clue is worth 2 damage, generally. This is just that, right? You're getting -1 Shroud, and it works very well getting the job done. So I play Lantern actually quite a bit now. It takes up my hand slots in all my non-scavenging decks, and I don't really scavenge anymore because it's kind of boring. I've done it a million times, and now that it costs 2 and 4 experience, I feel less inclined to because I think there's better things to spend my Survivor experience on, like apparently Lure. Last card here on the list is... another quiet Survivor card. Survivor, generally with its pool, we know what cards are good and we know what cards are bad. It's one of those things that it's just we can just know that. We've known that for a long, long time. This card, however, I think everyone kind of agrees is a very good card, but it doesn't actually see the light of day that much. And that card is Guiding Spirit. This is a 1 cost, 1 experience ally in the Survivor class from Circle Undone. It's an ally and a Geist. Soaks for 3 horror and damage. You get +1 book. We're going to stop there for a second. Okay? +1 book for 1 resource in the ally slot is insane. That is one of those things that a lot of people end up playing allies that just end up being a stat boost, right? For example, Jeremiah Kirby, people draw 2 cards of him, and then he's just a stat boost. And that's really good. If you're building your deck around Jeremiah Kirby and you're consistently drawing 5 cards, that's a different story. But a lot of people are going to just be putting these cards in because they want the stat boost. Some people will play Granny Orn. She's very good. She costs a lot of money and a lot of experience, right? And they're getting it for that book boost in the Survivor class, right? And they sometimes use her ability. But unless you're building around it, is your experience really well spent there? And I think that when we talk about Guiding Spirit, this MFer with his hand on your shoulder and his finger pointing over your other shoulder is really, really efficient for his cost. It's very good. Like just 1 cost, 1 experience, 1 book, and then you get 2 Horror Soak. Now, I might be thinking, Justin, you get 3 Horror Soak. Slow down! We don't get 3 Horror Soak. We only get 2 Horror Soak with this ability. And I'm going to go into why in a second. Non-direct horror must be assigned to Guiding Spirit before it be assigned to your Investigator card. And after Guiding Spirit is defeated by horror, exile it. So, generally, the play pattern for this guy is, by the way, take a shot every time I say generally. I've been saying it a lot this video, haven't I? It's just, it's apparently my word of the day. But when the play pattern for this guy generally is to have him soak 2 horror and then play another Guiding Spirit or play another one of your allies. This guy's 1 cost means that he is a super disposable ally, and he works really well in ally-based decks. Like maybe, for example, Daryl Simmons or Minty Fan in like a Allies Matter style of deck, featuring things like Laboratory Assistant and Art Student, right? If you just put Guiding Spirit into that thing, that can work really well for just like fitting into that package. However, this guy also can just protect you for 3 horror for 1 experience. Within the Survivor class, isn't actually, again, as high as it is, because Survivor experience bottoms out pretty quickly because things are just lower costed, and Survivors generally need less to get things going and, actually, like, have their decks be functional at high XP cost. They don't have the same kind of levels as, say, for example, Rogues or Mystics, right? And if this Ghost, this little Guiding Spirit, gave you 3 Horror Soak while also providing you a large amount of turns. Like, how many turns do you need this guy to give you +1 book? How many investigates does this guy need to trigger for you to pass, for you to get your value out of him? If he also, for example, takes 3 horror and you have to buy him again, or alternatively, what if you just don't buy him again? What if you buy something else, right? I think the problem is with exile cards is that we get attached to them, right? We want to be attached to them and have them in our deck forever. So if we lose one, we want it back. But I don't think that's generally necessarily the case. You could buy other things instead, or, you could just buy it again if you wanted to. But how many uses does this guy need to get if he gets exiled? And the answer to that, for 1 cost, 1 experience, if this guy gets you like 4 to 5 turns, probably, of investigate actions, like not 12 actions, but like if he gets you like 5 or 6 clues, I think that's pretty good for 1 cost and 1 experience, just like passively giving you that book boost, because he's also going to be soaking 3 horror for you. However, realistically, it's not that hard to not die, like to have this guy not die to horror. There's other things you can do to soak. You can pick him up. You can, like, play another ally to get rid of him, again, in that Ally Matters deck. I think Guiding Spirit is actually a pretty powerful card that is never played. 1, because other allies are stronger. I'm not going to beat around the bush and say that Guiding Spirit is a very strong ally. I think Guiding Spirit is a strong ally, but I don't think, like, competes with, like, the higher tier allies that Survivor has, right? However, I do think that it is worthy of that consideration of just a cheap book boost that gets the job done, because that is a pretty good effect to have, especially if you are doing any sort of ally shenanigans. I think Guiding Spirit would fit right in. So those are 5 Survivor cards that I think you should give a second chance, because I gave them second chances and I love them now. I think the cards are all really sick. That's the end of this series. Thanks for everyone who watched all 5 of these videos. I appreciate your support on the channel. If you want to go a step above, you can join our patrons from the Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and as always, a GG's.